So, if you've watched some of my fighting game reviews, you're aware that I love fighting games despite not being that good at them. And I think a big part of that is just the appeal of some solid martial arts action. I mean, I was pretty much raised on it. I've been watching Power Rangers since before I could walk. I grew up watching Jackie Chan and Van Damme movies with my parents. And even after film school exposed me to more artistic sensibilities, I've maintained a love for the way a well written and choreographed action scene can be as beautiful and meaningful as any dramatic monologue. In fact, fighting games and film kind of go back to day one for me, considering one of the first movies I ever watched was based on maybe the most important fighting game ever made. I mean it too. Martial arts, spy movies, video games, anime. So many of the interests that define who I am started right here. Heck, even my interest in the Darkman films started from a trailer that was on this videotape. It's funny. The moment Street Fighter the movie graced my TV screen was perhaps the most important day of my life. But for Hollywood, it was Tuesday. All jokes aside, the filming of this movie was anything but a normal day. Difficult actors, production problems, overbearing producers, and Capcom themselves breathing down director Stephen E. D'Souza's neck meant that it's a wonder this film even got made. In mid-1993, Street Fighter II was kind of a big friggin' deal. Released in 1991 as a sequel to a modestly successful '87 arcade game, Street Fighter 1 is, really rough. Just ignore it. Street Fighter 2 became a runaway success that revolutionized the arcade industry, creating essentially a new genre of imitators, spin-offs, clones, some of the best of which were made by Street Fighter's own creators at Capcom. Capcom would release an update 1 year later called Champion Edition, tweaking some moves and making the 4 boss characters playable. 9 months later came Street Fighter II Turbo, followed by Super Street Fighter II in '93, which introduced 4 more characters as well as super moves, which have become a defining aspect of the series. And this is not to mention the ports to pretty much every available home console and computer, a G.I. Joe tie-in, board games. Also, ignore Street Fighter 2010, it doesn't count. Basically, Street Fighter was a bankable as frick IP around this point in time, and Capcom execs were coming to LA to hear script pitches. Screenwriter Stephen E. D'Souza was able to get himself a meeting based on some of his former projects. Some films you might have heard of, like Commando, Die Hard, 48 Hours, The Running Man. Also Hudson Hawk, but he probably didn't pitch himself on that. D'Souza presented a rough draft based on one of Capcom's potential sequel ideas that painted the game's antagonist, M. Bison, as more of a militaristic James Bond film. Capcom liked the pitch and brought D'Souza on as writer and director. Also, let's just get rid of this elephant in the room right away. In the original Street Fighter II video game, the villain's name was Vega, owing to his ambiguous Latin American dictator concept. Serving him were 2 bad guys, one named Balrog, owing to the fact that having a handsome Spanish bullfighter named after a hideous bull monster was ironic, and a boxer named M. Bison, or Mike Bison, a take on Mike Tyson. Fearing a lawsuit from Tyson when the game came stateside, Capcom USA decided to switch the characters' names around, making Bison Balrog, Vega Bison, and Balrog Vega. And if that wasn't enough, Capcom USA decided that Guile's friend Nash should be named Charlie, since Nash didn't sound like an authentic American name. This would have consequences later on. Since we're talking about the movie, I'm going to stick with the American names because that's what the movie does. You'll figure it out, don't worry. Capcom asked D'Souza to write them a script that covered all 15 characters from the game. D'Souza realized he'd never be able to give 15 characters appropriate screen time in a 90-minute film, and he managed to talk them down to 7 by simply asking if anyone in the room could name all 7 dwarves, which nobody could. The first 2 actors cast for this film were Jean-Claude Van Damme, who was at the top of his action star game in '93, and Raul Julia, auditioning on behalf of his kids, who were huge fans of the game. The studio felt Van Damme would give the film action cred, whilst Julia's proven acting chops would help sell the film as a serious project. A big chunk of the budget having gone to those 2, the rest of the cast was made up of unproven B-list and character actors. Included were Roshan Seth, known for Gandhi and Temple of Doom, aka the best indie movie, Ming-Na Wen of the '93 drama Joy Luck Club, horror icon Miguel Nunez Jr., Byron Mann, whose career would later take off in shows like Wu Assassin and Altered Carbon, Wes Studi from, every 90s movie with a Cherokee guy, and pop star Kylie Minogue, whose casting was a last-minute decision made to appease the Australian Actors Guild. Production was apparently rough. Raul Julia was battling stomach cancer, and this would ultimately be his final film. Production was switched around to give him time to regain weight he'd lost to cancer treatments, causing complications with the stunt coordinators who'd expected to do their stunt work last, and now basically had no prep time. Also, Van Damme, according to his own words, was apparently at the peak of a really nasty coke habit around this time. And according to the director, he would often miss the already scant shooting dates to do some blow, to work out, or to cheat on his wife with Kylie Minogue. I actually do respect Van Damme as a performer, but the dude was not the best version of himself right now. Capcom also continued to add demands as production went on. The initial script focused on 7 characters, but the final film contains 15 of the game's 16 characters. Bruce Lee-like and Rekka master Fei Long was cut, presumably due to Capcom's desire to not make a stereotypical martial arts film.
He knew when his call time was, but nobody's seen him since lunch.
It's always something with that Fei Long. He's a troublemaker.
And he was replaced with the character Captain Sawada, played by actor Kenya Sawada, who Capcom initially picked for Ryu, but who D'Souza finessed into a supporting role based on the fact that he spoke no English. In addition, production itself was a nightmare. A line producer suffered a heart attack, another got in a car accident, and the entire cast and crew suffered from heat and exhaustion due to not being used to the Thailand weather. Filming moved to Australia ahead of schedule, but still managed to go over time, necessitating reshoots in Vancouver. Finally, the MPAA insisted on rating this version of the film R, meaning the version we got was even more chopped up in editing to get it down to a PG-13. Leaving most of the action and violence you would come to the movie for on the cutting room floor. Street Fighter the movie made its December '94 release date, and actually did fairly well at the box office. It became a critical failure, however, and alongside the Super Mario Bros. Movie has become one of the shining examples of bad video game movies in the public eye. I think it's an amazingly underrated action movie though, and now I'm going to show you why.
This is Sander Van Oker, and this is the GNT World News.
Street Fighter begins with a newscast hosted by Chun-Li, a reporter here as opposed to her game's Interpol background, that sets up the general conflict of the movie, with Guile and the GDI, and the Allied nations, having recently moved into the war-torn Southeast Asian country of Shadaloo, where Cobra, the private army of General M. Bison has taken several relief workers hostage. Apparently, this film's version of Bison is some kind of drug lord. You could call that an attempt at grounding this film in realism, but I think it's an arcade reference. Winners don't do drugs. Partly due to reshoots, and partly due to the sheer number of characters to follow, you'll notice this movie does a lot of telling, as opposed to showing with the story. That said, the tempo keeps it up, so you never feel like things are grinding to a halt. Also, you know what other movie started with a news montage?
On the march!
I mean, I'm not saying Street Fighter is a better movie than Citizen Kane, but... Bison establishes himself as a proper villain by snapping the necks of a few random AN guys before hijacking Chun-Li's interview with Guile.
What the hell? Balrog, Balrog, do you believe this?
Believe this, Honda. Man, I'm shooting it. Colonel Guile!
Also, if that cut reads like I think, he somehow hijacks a camera, which I don't think is physically possible. The sequence also introduces us to Chun-Li's news team of Balrog and Honda, along with Zangief and DJ, who are bad guys now because honestly there were way too many heroes already. Why Balrog is now a hero I'm not entirely sure, but it might have been because of his overtly athletic background fitting with Honda. Bison taunts Guile, and Guile engages in some smack talk before letting slip that his friend Charlie is one of Bison's captives. You know, like an idiot. Bison cuts the broadcast, and Guile's aide Cammy lets Chun-Li know that Guile is definitely not a misogynist.
He doesn't like women, does he?
Oh, no. No, he doesn't like journalists. I assure you it's an equal opportunity dislike.
We then cut to our B-plot guys, Ryu and Ken. The proper pronunciation is Ryu.
Ryu!
Except Ryu.
Ryu.
But everyone in the film pronounces it Ryu.
Ryu!
Ryu, where you going?
And Ryu Hoshi. Couple of low-rent operators. We took them in last night's sweep.
There's actually an ongoing war in my head between the fact that this movie is etched on my soul and the fact I took 2 years of Japanese language courses, so forgive me if I waffle. Ryu and Ken are traveling conmen in this film. And as much as that deviates from their canon origins as dedicated martial artists, they're still one of the best parts of this film. Byron Mann and Damien Chapa really did their best, and I totally buy these guys as best friends who have been through a lot together.
Sorry I talked you into all this.
I'm sorry I listened.
The two plan on swindling local arms dealer Sagat with some fake guns, but he catches them red-handed and decides to toy with the guys by making them fight to the death in an underground pit fight against his champion, Vega. Ryu is up first. Sagat mentions he used to be a fighter himself, Iron Fist, before retiring. Also, I really love Vega's reaction in this cutaway gag. The visual comedy in this movie is one of its best points. Before the cage match can begin, Guile busts in with a G.I. Joe vehicle. That's not a joke, by the way. That tank was actually designed to be a part of the Hasbro toy line for this movie. Try not to think about the inherent metaphor of a military vehicle cock-blocking one of the only martial arts fights in this film, and let's move on. One of the bigger complaints about this film was that, for a Street Fighter movie, it contains very little street fighting. None, really. Though I would argue neither does the video game. Sure, there are fights in the streets, but I think those are all technically sanctioned tournament matches in the canon of the game. Now, Final Fight, that game contains some street fighting, like 90%, in fact. Also, Pit Fighter, that was pretty much what it said on the tin. What were we talking about again? The last plot thread is that of Dr. Dalsum. He is probably the biggest departure from the game, being a captive scientist instead of a fighting yogi. I have no explanations for this, other than that D'Souza was probably well past the screw-it point of fitting all the game's characters in. Bison is forcing Dalsum to convert Charlie into a brainwashed biological warrior to conquer the world. I didn't mention before, but the game's character of Charlie wasn't fleshed out until Street Fighter Alpha, which released almost a year after this film. So the film combines him with the character Blanca.
Carlos Blanca. Charlie.
Like many things in this movie, I think it made sense at the time. Bison is conditioning Blanca by exposing him to constant video of violence and death, while electrocuting and drugging him at the same time. Dhalsim tries to help Blanca by slipping in calming, peaceful imagery when Ron Jeremy over there isn't looking. Honestly, I feel him. This is me whenever my parents put on New Amsterdam in the living room. Guile, Cammy, and T-Hawk, who's also a military guy now, because why not, are giving a briefing before being rudely interrupted by this guy.
Sir! Look. Charlie Tom.
A fight breaks out, and Guile notices the tension between Ken and Ryu versus Sagat's guys. Did Vega just make that? They've been in jail less than a day, and he's already reconstructed a 3-claw mega shiv. Even if he'd smuggled it in, just look at that craftsmanship. It's got sturdy structural support, solid edges. Anyway, somehow, this is enough for him to realize they're okay guys, and that he can recruit them as double agents. Guile gives them the means to escape, allowing the two to get in Sagat and Vega's good graces, setting them up to kill Guile for good measure. Okay, so we all know this is a fake out, and they're not going to kill off Van Damme in a movie where his face is on the poster. But let's break this sequence down for a second. As soon as the prisoners take the van, T-Hawk jumps on the back and begins wrestling with Ken. By putting himself in the way, T-Hawk ensures none of the soldiers endanger their agents by accidentally firing on them. Next, he sets up a believable way for Ken to get a gun filled with blanks that won't actually hurt Guile. Him telling the men not to fire lest they hit the colonel is a little weak, but in the heat of action it makes sense. Basically, it's never spelled out for you explicitly, but on repeat viewings you can see all the pieces coming together. And the way the film illustrates this without having to slow down and tell you everything is really cool. It's a nice bit of cinematic technique that I think illustrates what this film is capable of when it's at its best. Anyway, Chun-Li smells something is up and dons this really ill-fitting morph suit to break into the AN morgue. Guile surprises her though, just as Cammy and T-Hawk show up. Why is he still there anyway? What, was he just gonna lay there overnight? I get needing to have him interred to keep the cover, but like, Guile has a lot of stuff he needs to be doing. Was he taking a nap? Chun-Li drops some backstory and asks for Guile's help in getting revenge on Bison. But Guile has her taken away, saying her revenge isn't as important as his.
This war is not about your personal vendetta.
It's about mine.
Why is he our hero again? Luckily, Cammy and T-Hawk are terrible at their jobs, so Lee escapes almost immediately. We then cut to a black market, bazaar, circus place, where we see she just kind of teleported there, and into the cover identity of a performer. I have a theory that some of the connective fiber between these scenes was victim to the extensive re-editing. It's sudden, but again, I think this film gives you enough stuff going on that you don't spend too much time dwelling on the details. Namely, another quick Ken and Ryu character moment, and the introduction of one of the most iconic prop gags in action movie history.
Every bison dollar will be worth 5 British pounds. For that is the exchange rate the Bank of England will set once I've kidnapped their queen.
Ryu and Ken get snagged by Chun-Li, Honda, and Balrog, who drop some more backstory about Bison having respectively disgraced Honda's sumo career and Balrog's boxing career, somehow, and warn them that they plan to blow the place up. They let Ken and Ryu go, but the guys walk back into a standoff between Sagat and Bison over the aforementioned Bison dollars. I keep mentioning it, but this tent scene contains some of the best comedy moments in the movie. I love how they both immediately go into con mode as they try to de-escalate things. Nothing, however, compares to what comes next. As Chun-Li interrupts the standoff to let Bison know she's about to send a truck of explosives directly his way, we get perhaps the most iconic comedy line in this or any other movie.
Quick! Change the channel!
Since Chun-Li literally sent them a message telling what her plan was, Bison, Sagat, and all their guys escape, capturing her and her crew in the edit. I get it, she's blinded by revenge and wants Bison to know it was her who killed him, but this might be one of the handful of times where the hero should have just killed the villain instead of monologuing. Bison then brings everyone back to his base, though Lee, Honda, and Balrog now think the guys sold him out, and are a little miffed by it.
Sucks. These guys are good guys. Like us. Lately, I don't feel very good.
Oh yeah, the hostages. Raise your hand if you forgot about the biggest MacGuffin in this entire movie. The guys do get some new Bison Trooper gear. You know, karate gis like all the Bison Troopers have been wearing up until now. It's a flimsy reason to get them in game-accurate outfits, though, so I can accept that, to be honest.
You get a good look at that video map?
Just got the left half.
Good, I got the right.
With Ryu and Ken having located Bison's base, Guile and company are ready to stage a daring river raid. But our stock spineless government dude tells Guile that the AN is going to meet Bison's demands rather than risk any more bloodshed. Guile knows Bison won't stop until he's taken out, though, and rouses his men with a speech so epic, I'm willing to risk a copyright strike for it.
Troopers, I just received new orders. Our superiors say the war is canceled. We can all go home. Bison is getting paid off for his crimes, and our friends who have died here will have died for nothing. But we can all go home. Meanwhile, ideals like peace, freedom, and justice, they get packed up. But we can all go home. Well, I'm not going home. I'm gonna get on my boat, and I'm going upriver, and I'm going to kick that son of a bitch Bison's ass so hard that the next Bison wannabe is gonna feel it. Now, who wants to go home, and who wants to go with me?
I joke, but it's kind of funny how little this pep talk says or accomplishes. We see Guile is right. Bison is definitely a maniac who won't stop until he rules the world, and negotiating with him only strengthens that. But Guile doesn't really speak to that. He just kind of hinges his talking points on how lame peacetime is and the innate moral conviction of a bunch of UN troops. You know, because UN soldiers are paragons of heroism and moral conviction. Also, I get that they're stuck-up pencil pushers and all, but is anyone kind of getting the feeling Guile is kind of a dick? Meanwhile, Bison has brought Chun-Li into his private quarters for the line. Chun-Li explains that Bison raided her village and killed her father when she was young, so she spent her whole adult life dedicated to getting revenge. And that's when he drops the villain line to end all villain lines.
You don't remember?
For you, the day Bison graced your village was the most important day of your life. But for me,
It was Tuesday.
I love this movie. Ryu and Ken show up to liberate Honda and Balrog, but there's a bit of a misunderstanding.
I think he said he could lead us outside.
What I said was...
We're on the same side!
I have to mention this because back in Bison's room, Chun-Li takes advantage of Bison's complacency to kick the ever-living crap out of him. This would probably be the movie right here, but the guys show up just in time to distract her, giving Bison a chance to dip out and leave them all in a room of James Bond knockout gas. Guile and the gang arrive in their cool G.I. Joe boat and begin the assault on Bison's base. Bison realizes Ken and Ryu were spies,
of course,
and activates the defenses. I do like how he has to give this General Ripper incel line to Chun-Li first.
And now, Miss Zhang, you will witness firsthand the power that you spurned.
Meanwhile, Captain Lou Albano realizes Dalsum has been subverting Blanca's programming and starts beating him about the lab. This releases Blanca though, and a new warrior enters the stage. This is how I look, leaving my room at 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. The boat blows up, but Guile, Cammy, and T-Hawk escape and infiltrate the base by land. Note Cammy's one remaining action scene here. Also, T-Hawk dons his headband from the game in between edits.
T-Hawk, what's with the headband?
It's Cherokee. I wear for good luck in battle.
Around this point in the story, everyone starts to resemble their game costumes a little bit more. At least within the limits of this film's reality. Ryu and Ken get their gis, T-Hawk has a headband, Chun-Li gets a red dress that kinda sorta resembles the Cheongsam type situation from Street Fighter 2. Dalsum even shaves his head later on. I always thought it would be funny if Guile got electrocuted Wile E. Coyote style and it made his hair poof up like in the game. He's rocking kind of a subtle high-end type, but it's not quite the same. I guess now would also be a good time to mention the game that was based off this movie. There was an arcade machine released in June of '95, followed by a console game in August. Part of the contract for this film necessitated the actors all reprise their roles for digitized sprites in this game, a la the early Mortal Kombat titles. The arcade game was developed by Incredible Technologies, who'd previously made Time Killers and Bloodstorm. Hoo boy, is that a future video. Exclusive to the arcade version are 4 Bison Trooper cyborgs, Blade, and unlockable characters Arcane, Kyber, and F7, all of whom are palette swaps of each other, similar to the ninjas or cyborgs in Mortal Kombat 3. Sawada is playable in the arcade with a unique set of moves that I actually enjoyed. Someday we'll get that Street Fighter V DLC, buddy. Someday. The console version, which I was lucky enough to pick up during my local video store's going out of business sale, was developed by Capcom, and re-added Blanca and DJ to the game, who were originally cut from the arcade version due to time constraints. It's, in movies when a character gets hit by a tranquilizer dart and everything starts to get all slow and just a little distorted? Imagine that happened to Super Street Fighter 2 and you have this game. The important things to mention are the omissions of Dalsum, probably due to time, and T-Hawk, due to actor Greg Rainwater apparently yeeting out of production as soon as the film was finished. Sawada's moves are completely changed in the home version, giving him some sort of Fei Long-ish moves as well as some really weird, cartoonish samurai stereotype moves. Also, digitized Akuma, baby. Notably, Akuma was played by stuntman Ernie Reyes Sr., father of the famed Ninja Turtle and Surf Ninja Ernie Reyes Jr., giving this movie one more connection to surf ninjas aside from the costume director. Something about imagining this Akuma just appearing in the context of the movie's plot kills me. Back to the film, though. Guile spelunks down into the lab and meets his old pal Blanca. Guile is about to mercy kill him, but Dalsum stops him, saying he's still human, and the real monster is upstairs. Remember this scene. Seeing his demands have not been met, Bison calls up his new creation to kill the hostages. Guile has taken the lift instead, though, breaking all laws of space-time, physics, and logic to huck a fatty gainer sidekick at Bison's head, freeing everyone else and starting the proverbial boogaloo. Honda begins wrestling with Zangief, Ryu and Ken get sent off to free the hostages, Lee and Balrog head off after the guys, and Cammy and T-Hawk lead the assault above ground. My favorite bit is how DJ pulls a Mr. Pink and pretty much immediately dips out to save his own skin. Ken and Ryu split up, with Ryu having decided to help a worthy cause, while Ken just wants to get out of here. Captain Sawada shows up and finds this broadcast, complete with Godzilla noises. Is having the only Japanese actor in the movie find this offensive? It feels offensive. Maybe not, I don't know. Guile hooks up with his troops, but neither him nor Bison can resist the bravado of a man-to-man challenge, and dismiss everyone else. We cut back to Ken stopping to play some Five Nights at Freddy's. He sees Ryu about to be bushwhacked by Sagat and Vega, and rushes back to help his friend. We get a nice little fight with Ryu getting beat, Ken showing up to help, and the two friends triumphing. Also, we get the 3 Shoto moves in a blink or you'll miss it sequence. The Shoryuken, the Tatsumaki Simpgyaku, and even the Hadoken. It actually seemed pretty short range, so maybe it was more of a Gadoken. Guile manages to best Bison, but Bison resurrects himself for round 2, powered by
Superconductor electromagnetism. Surely you've heard of it. It levitates bullet trains from Tokyo to Osaka.
Bison starts psycho-crushing the crap out of Guile until Guile finally finds an opening and takes Bison out. Triggering the building's self-destruct. The rest of the gang finds the hostages just in time, and Zangief finally realizes Bison was the bad guy.
Enemy of freedom and peace. These people have come from all over the world to stop him. If you're smart, you'll save your own ass.
General Bison, he's a bad guy. If you know this, then why do you serve him?
Because he paid me a freaking fortune, you moron.
You got paid?
Guile tries to save Dalsum and Blanca, but they've decided to let themselves die with the base. You know, after Dalsum's entire plotline revolved around saving Blanca, after that whole speech about how he deserves to live and everything. Oh well. Guile seems to have also gone down with the base, and the whole cast is pretty bummed, even though only maybe half of them even knew him that well. Turns out he's fine, though. Sagat and DJ get a karmic comeuppance, and the good guys react to the base exploding in maybe the most unnatural way possible. I absolutely love this movie. But even I can admit that it's only a shell of the film it could have been. There are entirely too many characters, the story and fight scenes are noticeably chopped up, and there are plenty of because action movie plot devices that don't really contribute to the actual story. That said, there's still a lot to like about this movie, and some things that even kind of impress me from an analytical standpoint. The main thing is that this movie really isn't about Guile half as much as it thinks it is. Sure, he ends up defeating Bison and all, but be it due to Van Damme's absence on set or by design, he doesn't have much going on as a character. Guile starts off as a self-assured guy who doesn't need anyone else, and he finishes as a self-assured guy who doesn't need anyone else. Compare this to Chun-Li, who starts single-mindedly focused on revenge, but learns the importance of living during the hostage rescue, represented by her willingness to finally flirt with Guile in the end bit. Or to Ryu and Ken, who go from self-motivated hucksters who have forgotten the teachings of their sensei.
Guile was right. You've forgotten everything our sensei talked about. Trust, honor.
To heroes willing to fight for each other and for others. Even Zangief has an arc where he's been consistently characterized as having conviction and values, but realizes his conviction has been misdirected. Even the fights aren't that bad. They're edited to heck and back, but what does make it to the screen works, even if little from the game made it in. Guile's aggressive bravado comes through in his fighting, as does Chun-Li's relentless anger. The way Ryu fights honorably while Ken goes for tricks and cheap shots, and so on. The only trick is the choreography isn't really martial arts choreography on some level. It's action movie choreography, if that makes sense. There's no back and forth or focus on technique. Characters fight, and they either win or lose within a few moves, which brings me to my last point. The biggest thing you hear about this movie is how little it has in common with the games it's based on. But, you know what? I think it does alright. As mentioned, when this movie was being written, a lot of the anime Street Fighter lore hadn't been established yet. Ironically, the Street Fighter II OVA would release in Japan 4 months before this film came out in the US, getting an English dub roughly around the time this film made it to Japan. The anime would establish a lot of the plot and style details that now define the series. I mention this because without that OVA, the G.I. Joe approach of this film makes a bit more sense. Things like Blanca's mutations or Bison's psycho power had very little background. And this film does an admirable effort of tying everything together. Also, the costumes are a bit rough, but compare this to some of the superhero movies coming out around this time, and I think we see a legit attempt at bringing these things to the big screen. Honestly, the more I learn about this film, the more it impresses me. This movie had issue after issue going against it to the point you kind of wonder how it got made at all. And yet it did. And not only that, but we ended up with something fun, memorable, and even well put together for what it is. And as someone who wants to make films of my own, that's kind of inspiring. See you guys.
Death was designed to ingratiate his spies with you. I guess you didn't see that, did you?